Imagine a killer committing a heinous crime and then going to great lengths to escape the police. The situation escalated to the point where he disfigured his face with his own hands. This killer believed that if he did a certain thing, it would allow him to get away with it forever. However, this thing he had placed all his hopes on backfired, and instead of being his lifeline, it became his noose. Do you want to know what this thing was? Follow the story to the end. Our story begins with this girl named Lindsay Hawker. Lindsay lived in England, specifically in a city called Coventry. From a young age, she grew up in a loving and close-knit family. She had a beautiful childhood, grew up, and completed her studies with excellence, achieving top grades. In 2007, Lindsay turned 22, and at that time, she decided she wanted to start exploring the world and have new experiences. Japan, in particular, was one of the places she loved most and dreamed of visiting. So, Lindsay applied for a job at a chain of schools in Japan called Nova, which are schools specializing in teaching English. These schools didn't accept just anyone, you had to have a high level of English to be a teacher there. Lindsay was accepted and was very excited to start. She arrived in Japan, specifically in the capital, Tokyo, to begin her work at Nova schools and live this new experience in life. Lindsay, being naturally sociable, quickly got to know people. After a few days, she met two teachers at the same school where she taught and moved in with them in the same apartment. So, the three teachers were living together. Although Lindsay was enjoying her time and her new life, she also missed her family and friends she had left behind in England. She would always call them, write to them, and tell them what was happening with her. She always praised Japan and Tokyo for the wonderful life she was living there. However, after several months of living in Tokyo, specifically on one day in March 2007, Lindsay, after finishing her work and leaving the school, went to the parking lot where she had parked her bicycle. As she was unlocking her bike, a man began to approach her. This man kept getting closer and closer until he was directly behind her. Here, Lindsay turned her head to see what he wanted. Immediately, this man told her, "I am one of the students who study in your class." Lindsay was surprised because she had memorized all the faces and names of her students and it was the first time she had seen this man in her life. Lindsay tried to ignore him and said a few words, telling him, "It's nice to meet you." She immediately took her bike, got on it, and started heading to her apartment quickly. But this strange man began to follow her. The more Lindsay increased her speed, the more she noticed that this man was increasing his speed behind her. At first, he was walking, then he started jogging lightly, and then he started running fast. Although Lindsay was on her bike and he was on foot, because of the narrow alleys and streets, she couldn't speed up more, so he was able to catch up with her wherever she went. The closer he got to her, the more he tried to start a conversation with her. He would ask her where she was from, where she studied, and things like that. Lindsay kept trying to get away from him, but this man stuck to her and kept trying to get her number. You can imagine how scary this situation was for her. Finally, after a while, she reached her apartment. When she stopped in front of the building's door, this man was still following her. When he finally reached her, before she could enter the building, he said, "Please, just give me a chance to talk. Let me explain what I want." Lindsay was supposed to ignore him and enter the apartment immediately, but at the same time, she was afraid that he would continue to follow her and stalk her since he knew where she lived. So, at that moment, she decided to listen to what he had to say. The man said, "My name is Tatsuya Ichihashi. My dream is to study abroad in Europe or America, and to achieve this dream, I need to master the English language. I need someone to teach me. Could we meet in a coffee shop and you give me private lessons?" Lindsay was surprised, wondering why he had asked her of all people. She replied, "I'm sorry, but I'm not able to give private lessons right now. My schedule is very busy with schoolwork." Tatsuya didn't know what to say. Signs of frustration began to appear on his face. After a few moments of hesitation, he said, "Okay, fine, but can I come into the apartment and get a glass of water? I've been running a long distance after you, and I feel like I'm dying of exhaustion." Lindsay was hesitant at first, but then she remembered that her roommates were in the apartment. On the contrary, this could be an opportunity to show him that she wasn't living alone and that if he tried to follow her or stalk her again, they would report him immediately. So, Lindsay agreed and let him into the apartment. Her roommates were there, and Lindsay made sure they saw this man's face clearly. Then, she sat him on the couch and went to get him a glass of water. While she was going to get him the water, Tatsuya took out a notebook and a pen and started writing. When Lindsay came back with the glass of water, she put it on the table in front of him. Tatsuya raised his eyes to her and said, "Thank you." Then, he immediately went back to writing in the notebook, leaving the water in its place on the table, even though he had just said he was dying of thirst. Lindsay was surprised and said to him, "What are you doing? Aren't you going to drink the water?" He replied while still writing, "Just a moment, I'm almost done." Lindsay was confused and didn't understand what he was doing exactly. Moments later, Tatsuya finished writing on the paper and immediately tore it off and gave it to Lindsay. The paper had a sketch of Lindsay drawn on it, along with his name, phone number, and email address. Lindsay was even more surprised as she looked at the paper. Tatsuya immediately said to her, "Believe me, you won't regret it if you decide to give me a chance and teach me. Our meetings will be in a coffee shop in a public place, and our relationship will be a professional one, a teaching relationship and nothing else. I don't want anything else, and I will pay you $32 for every hour." Lindsay began to seriously consider the matter, especially since this time the offer included a clear amount of money. $32 per hour was a respectable amount in 2007, even higher than her salary at the school. Tatsuya was assuring her that the relationship between them would be a business relationship only, a teacher and a student, and that it would be in a public place. Here, Lindsay felt that there was no problem and decided to accept the offer. She told Tatsuya that she agreed to the offer, and they agreed to meet in a specific coffee shop after a few days. Here, one might wonder how she accepted this offer. Didn't she see how suspicious this man was, how he claimed at first to be one of her students, and then stalked her home? No matter how tempting the offer was and how many guarantees there were, she should never have accepted it. But maybe she thought to herself, "Let me try, what do I have to lose?" And indeed, on March 24, 2007, Lindsay met Tatsuya at the coffee shop they had agreed on. The surveillance camera in the shop filmed these two together. Outwardly, Lindsay seemed comfortable, she didn't seem anxious or stressed. But at the same time, she would distance herself when Tatsuya got close to her, and she made sure to keep a distance between them. The two of them sat at one of the tables and stayed there for about an hour. During this hour, Lindsay learned more about Tatsuya's level of English and began to teach him according to his level. After the hour had passed and the private lesson was over, Tatsuya began to search his pockets and check left and right as if he was looking for something. Moments later, signs of stress began to appear on him, and he said to Lindsay, "I'm very sorry, but it seems I forgot my wallet at home. Could you pay the bill, and then we'll go to my place, and I'll pay you the full amount?" Now, Lindsay found herself in an awkward situation. She had no choice but to pay the bill. Then, they left the coffee shop, and now she had to go with him to his place to get the money for the bill and the lesson. Tatsuya hailed a taxi from the street, and the taxi took them to the building where Tatsuya's apartment was. There, Lindsay paid the taxi driver again and told him, "Please, could you wait for me a bit? We'll go up to the apartment, I'll get something, and I'll be right back." The taxi driver said, "Okay, no problem, I'll wait." Lindsay got out with Tatsuya, and the taxi driver waited. But a minute, 5, and 10 minutes passed, and Lindsay was nowhere to be seen. The taxi driver began to think that she had changed her mind and wasn't coming back. So, the taxi driver decided to leave, and maybe he was even a little angry and offended that she had made him wait for nothing. Lindsay had evening classes at school that day, so her colleagues and the administration were surprised when she was absent without an excuse and without telling anyone, not even her roommates. As we said, they were also teachers at the school. They tried to call her, but her phone was off. After the school day ended, they returned to the apartment, hoping to find her inside. But Lindsay wasn't there. They knew that something had happened, so they called the police immediately and reported her disappearance. Then, a day and 2 days passed, and Lindsay was nowhere to be found. The police began to take the matter more seriously and began to circulate her information everywhere. Of course, the news reached Lindsay's family in England, who were also extremely worried about her. After the police interviewed Lindsay's roommates, the 2 roommates immediately told them about the strange man who had followed Lindsay home and told them that the last time they saw Lindsay, she was going to give a private lesson to the same man. In the apartment, the police found the paper on which Tatsuya had drawn a sketch of Lindsay and written his name, phone number, and email address. So, with a little research, the police were easily able to get his information and began their investigations about him and his place of residence. Through these investigations, they discovered that Tatsuya had a criminal record. Tatsuya was a 28-year-old man. His father was a well-known doctor at a large hospital, and his mother was a dentist with her own clinic. Tatsuya aspired to become a prominent doctor like his father, but his grades didn't allow him to enter the medical field. So, he switched to another major and completed his studies. After graduating, he continued to play around without any purpose in life. He didn't even try to get a job. He was living his life on an allowance of about $1,000 a month from his parents. During one period, Tatsuya was arrested on charges of attempted theft and assault on a woman who was walking in the street. But this case was eventually settled out of court. It is likely that Tatsuya's father paid the woman who was assaulted a substantial amount of money to drop the charges. It is said that the amount may have been around $10,000. Anyway, the police now had their eyes on Tatsuya and wanted to question him about Lindsay's disappearance. So, 2 police officers went to Tatsuya's apartment and knocked on the door. They waited for a few minutes, but there was no answer. The police went to Tatsuya's neighbors who lived in the adjacent apartment. When the neighbors opened the door, the police asked them if they knew where their neighbor Tatsuya was. But the neighbors answered in the negative and said that they had no information about him and didn't even know who he was. But at the same time, the neighbors were cooperative and allowed the police to look from their balcony at Tatsuya's balcony. When the police looked from the neighbor's balcony at Tatsuya's balcony and saw the large window overlooking the living room in the apartment, they saw that the lights in Tatsuya's living room were off. But after watching for a while, they felt as if someone was moving in the shadows inside the apartment. The police immediately returned to the door of Tatsuya's apartment and began knocking on the door again with greater force. But again, there was no answer. Here, the police knew that they had to break into the apartment. So, they immediately called for additional support, and the number of police officers in front of Tatsuya's apartment door became 9. These 9 were preparing themselves to break in. But at a moment of their inattention, suddenly the apartment door opened, and Tatsuya came out of the apartment running quickly. The police didn't even realize what had happened a moment ago. They tried to run after him, but Tatsuya's speed was insane. He was like an Olympic runner. The man immediately went down the stairs of the building. The winding stairs and the narrow space prevented the police from shooting at him. The problem was also that the police didn't have any support below the building. They were all upstairs preparing to break in. So, the police couldn't catch up with Tatsuya, who disappeared from the scene without a trace. We won't be too surprised by this when we know that Tatsuya was actually very athletic. He went to the gym every day and walked on the treadmill for 20 kilometers every day. This man was in peak fitness and strength, so it's natural that the police couldn't catch him after he escaped. But what's not natural is that he came out like that in front of them in this way without them even being able to react. Anyway, after the police entered the apartment, they found the disaster in front of them. On the balcony of the apartment, there was a bathtub. The bathtub in this apartment was detachable, meaning you could move it and put it anywhere in the house. It didn't have to be in the bathroom. The strange thing was that the bathtub was on the balcony outside. The police quickly understood the reason when they opened the cover that was on the bathtub. They found the bathtub filled with dirt, and from this dirt, a hand was sticking out. This hand was Lindsay's hand. After the police examined the entire apartment, they found her belongings scattered everywhere. After they took Lindsay's body out of the bathtub, her body was naked, and there were signs of beating and wounds on it. But it was also clear that she had put up a strong fight from the signs of blows and wounds on her. But the strange thing above all this was that her hair was completely shaved, and they found her shaved hair in Tatsuya's room. It seems that he had made a wig from it, which means that this sick man was keeping this hair like a trophy that testified to his crime, as if it were a prize. Maybe he even put it on his head and wore it. This revealed a new layer of madness in this man. The police knew that they were dealing with a real psychopath and that they had to find him quickly before he did anything else. On the morning of the next day, the police circulated Tatsuya's information everywhere and published his picture in the media. They printed posters and even printed large cardboard cutouts of his actual size and offered a reward of $10,000 for anyone who gave them any information leading to his arrest. They even had a possibility that Tatsuya might have disguised himself or tried to change his appearance. Based on the things they found in his apartment, they believed that he had an interest and love for wigs and hairpieces. So, they published photos of him modified with Photoshop, showing what he would look like if he were wearing a wig. But despite all these efforts, they couldn't find anything to lead them to him. Days, weeks, and months passed, and Tatsuya was nowhere to be found. Here, Lindsay's family, who were in England, were extremely angry with the Japanese police. So, they traveled to Japan themselves and led a campaign in the media to raise awareness about their daughter's case. The news even reached foreign media outlets. This put the Japanese police under the spotlight, and many criticisms were directed at them and their performance in the case. The first criticism was, for example, how 9 police officers were surrounding Tatsuya's apartment and allowed him to escape in this way. And why were the police publishing a picture of Tatsuya that was 7 years old? Tatsuya's appearance could have changed significantly. And many other criticisms that put the Japanese police in a very embarrassing position. After this media campaign, the police raised the reward to $100,000 for anyone who gave them information about Tatsuya. They even circulated his information to remote areas. But even after all this, they couldn't find the man. During this time, Tatsuya was moving between several different cities and regions in Japan. In the initial period of the case, when the police were focusing all their efforts on him, they were able to reach one of the remote islands where a small number of people lived. There, he found a shelter in one of the abandoned war shelters, a concrete shelter. He remained hidden in this isolated place for several months and only came out when necessary. He tried to disguise himself and wear hats, glasses, and clothes that hid his face. It is said that during this period, he visited some of the temples and shrines on the island to seek forgiveness for his sin because it seems that he was remorseful for the crime he had committed. But despite his feelings of guilt, he didn't want to turn himself in. Tatsuya didn't just settle for hats and trying to hide his face. He literally went to the point of disfiguring his face. He had moles on his face, so he took a razor and literally cut them off. He even tried to cut his lower lip from underneath to try to change the shape of his lips because his lips in particular were large and were one of the signs that could identify him. And of course, he grew his hair long to give himself a slightly different look. After about 6 months of living on this remote island, Tatsuya began to feel suffocated and felt that he could no longer tolerate this lifestyle. At the same time, he also felt that the search for him had probably decreased now and that the eyes were not focused on him as they were before at the beginning of the case. So, Tatsuya decided to leave the island and return to the cities. He boarded the first ferry and returned to the urban areas. He continued to move between cities for a while, fearing that someone would discover his identity. But indeed, as he expected, no one noticed him or paid attention to him. Of course, he was always taking precautions and always trying to hide his face and wear things that hid his features. Eventually, Tatsuya settled in a city called Nagoya. There, he was even able to get a job as a construction worker. Tatsuya had a goal to have plastic surgery to change his facial features significantly so that it would be impossible for anyone to recognize him from his face. So, Tatsuya worked for a long time in this construction job to save enough money to cover the costs of the surgery. After about 2 years, he finally saved enough money. Yes, imagine, he remained on the run for more than 2 years. If we add the period before that, we will find that he remained on the run for a total of more than 2.5 years from the time he committed the crime. It was a huge failure for the Japanese police. They knew the killer's appearance, name, and everything about him, but they couldn't catch him. Anyway, as we said, Tatsuya was able to save the money. And in October 2009, Tatsuya went to a plastic surgeon. He entered the doctor's clinic and was very afraid that they would recognize him, especially since in this clinic, the doctor had to take a close look at his face directly. Tatsuya sat with the doctor, feeling nervous, but he quickly relaxed when he noticed that the doctor was talking normally and it was clear that he didn't suspect anything at all. Tatsuya said to the doctor, "Look, doctor, I want to have surgery on my nose so that I can raise it and make it thinner." The doctor said, "Okay, the surgery is simple, and we can easily make it a little thinner and raise it for you." Tatsuya said to him, No, doctor, I don't want a slight thinning and raising. I want my nose to be very thin and very raised." The doctor was surprised. He said, "This will be a disfigurement rather than a cosmetic procedure. I don't think it will look better if we do it this way." Tatsuya said to the doctor, "I don't care. I want it this way. I hate my appearance, and I want it to change completely." The doctor began to suspect the matter and felt that this person in front of him had hidden things. Even without the surgery, he looked fine and could even be considered handsome, especially with his athletic build. So, why did he hate his appearance so much? The doctor, although he was surprised, said to Tatsuya, "Okay, we will do what you want. We will do the surgery for you." Tatsuya said to him with an urgent tone, "I want it now if you can." The doctor said, No, calm down. It's impossible now. You actually need to not eat or drink anything for 10 hours before the surgery. But we can give you an appointment for tomorrow if you like. Tatsuya said, "Okay, fine, I'll come tomorrow." Tatsuya came to the clinic the next day, and the doctor said, "We will take a before and after picture of you." This was the procedure followed in all cosmetic clinics. Naturally, the customer who changes their appearance has a before and after picture taken. Tatsuya hesitated and said, "I don't want you to publish my picture." The doctor said, No, we never publish our customers' pictures without their permission. These pictures are for the customer themselves and for our records for the archive. Here, Tatsuya reluctantly agreed, and he wasn't comfortable, but he agreed. Immediately after they took the picture, they took him into surgery. After the surgery, Tatsuya recovered from the surgery for several days and continued to visit the doctor. This is the picture they took of him after he recovered. So, now we have a before and after picture. Tatsuya took a copy of the picture, thanked the doctor, and left the clinic. He still had additional appointments for the doctor to make sure that everything was okay. But from that day on, Tatsuya never returned to the clinic again. The doctor felt that he had seen Tatsuya's face before somewhere, but he could never remember where. And of course, Tatsuya hadn't given them his real name. The surgery was completed, and several weeks passed, and the doctor hadn't seen Tatsuya for a while. But suddenly, one day, when this doctor was browsing one of the websites on the internet, he came across the case of Lindsay and the wanted killer, Tatsuya Ichihashi. The doctor was looking at the screen in shock. In front of him was the face of the patient he had operated on a few weeks ago. The doctor immediately called the police and reported what had happened and that he believed he had performed surgery on the most wanted man in Japan, Tatsuya Ichihashi. The police went to the doctor and received the before and after picture from him. They immediately published Tatsuya's new appearance on television and in the media. Imagine Tatsuya's shock when he saw his new picture spread everywhere. On top of that, this story revived the case and brought attention back to it after it had cooled down. This cosmetic or disfiguring surgery had the exact opposite result for Tatsuya. He had relied on it to hide from view, but it made him the center of attention. Now, Tatsuya knew that it was time to disappear again. He couldn't stay in the city. So, he decided to return to the same island where he had been before the beginning of the case. He immediately booked the nearest ferry. But when he arrived at the port, one of the employees recognized him and immediately reported the matter. Suddenly, Tatsuya found himself surrounded by the police from all sides. When they approached him and asked for his name, he knew that there was no escape. He confessed to them that he was the wanted Tatsuya Ichihashi, whom all of Japan had been looking for. After he was arrested, Tatsuya confessed to his crime and that he was infatuated with Lindsay and attracted to her. He confessed that he had lured her to his apartment, then grabbed her and raped her by force. Then, because he was afraid that her screams would reach the neighbors, he kept strangling her until she died. After this confession, Tatsuya remained in prison awaiting his trial. During this period, he wrote a book about the events that happened to him during the 2.5 years he was on the run from the police and how he was able to stay ahead of the police and not be discovered during that entire period. The book was titled Until the Arrest and sold like crazy in Japan and Britain. It sold more than 100,000 copies. Based on this book, they also made a movie called I Am Ichihashi. Tatsuya said that he was remorseful for the crime he had committed and that he wrote this book so that the profits he made would go to Lindsay's family. But Lindsay's family rejected this offer. On the contrary, in court, they demanded the death penalty for him. Although the death penalty existed in Japan, it was only carried out on serial killers or dangerous criminals. Tatsuya's lawyer was able to convince the court that Tatsuya was remorseful and that because he was still a young man in his 30s, he could be rehabilitated after he had lost hope. In the end, the court sentenced Tatsuya to life imprisonment in prison and did not give him the death penalty. He is still in prison to this day. This was the end of our story. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel and activate the bell button. And these are also great clips that you can watch. Thank you for watching. See you in the next clip. Goodbye.